So I want to take some time and work through Weber's own kind of methodology or mode of analysis. We've already seen with Durkheim his focus on social facts. So if you're thinking about how he analyzes the social world, he analyzes it through social facts. When we take Marx, we're looking at historical materialism, right? He's looking at historical material social relations, the particular objective social relations that exist in some historical moment, centered around the mode of production. Weber is going to be a little bit different in his methodology from both of these, and I'm going to try to highlight some of the differences as we work through how it is that Weber goes through his methodological analysis. The underlying framework that he's developing in his own analysis is what we can think of as interpretive sociology. And he really lays out what he means by this. When he thinks of sociology, all sociology should be interpretive sociology. And he lays out what he actually understands sociology itself to be. At the very beginning of his kind of magnum opus, Economy and Society, where he writes that sociology is a science concerning itself with the interpretive understanding of social action, and thereby with a causal explanation of its course and consequences. So this is how he understands what sociology is, and what we now call this, though, is interpretive sociology. So I've highlighted the three basic components that we really need to understand in developing his interpretive sociology. The first, the interpretive understanding, right? So there's a kind of focus on understanding and interpreting why it is people do what they say they do, or are actually doing what they're doing, right? So you have to go into a kind of understanding, as we'll see, from the vantage point of the actor themselves. There's a real focus on social action, and he'll be specific about what he means, how he distinguishes action from social action. And then he is concerned with a causal explanation of things. So causality is at the center piece of his interpretive sociology. And you can see, again, a real distinction between how he thinks about this sociology versus Marx and Durkheim, and we'll highlight that as we go along. But so this is interpretive sociology, so let's actually bracket out these distinctive components and come to understand each of them. What he's probably most known for, or the word that is most associated with Weber, at least methodologically, is this notion of Verstehen. This is a German word that's roughly translated as understanding. And so what it is that Weber's trying to do is engage in Verstehen. And what this means is he's trying to understand social action from the point of view of the actor themselves. So his goal is to try and make sense of any given action by looking at the situation as the actor understands it. Right? So social action for Weber can only be explained through this process of Verstehen, through understanding it by looking at the vantage point of the actor themselves. You should see this as very distinctive from historical materialism that Marx gives us, right? Weber's goal here is to uncover the kind of social meanings that are guiding social action. Objective relations, the kind of material relations that Marx is talking about, may or may not be a part of this in any given moment in time. For Marx, the subjective point of view of the actor themselves is irrelevant. What matters is those objective material relations. And as long as you understand the objective relations between capitalists and workers, you understand the dynamics of capitalism. That is to say, as long as you understand exploitation as an objective relationship between capitalists and workers, then you can explain class struggle and a whole sort of other things that Marx thinks are important about capitalism. Weber is saying, no, Marx, this is completely wrong. Exploitation has to be understood as such by the actors involved for it to matter. If you're going to link exploitation to class struggle, the actors involved, those workers involved, have to understand themselves first as being exploited before they will go and engage in any kind of class struggle. And this involves an interpretive understanding of how those workers view themselves in relation to capitalists, not just the material relations as they exist objectively. So this is an important thing to distinguish between Marx and Weber. Right? So understanding social action from the vantage point of the actor. What does Weber actually mean by social action? Because Verstehen actually hinges on this notion of social action. When he talks about social action, he talks about, quote, human conduct meaningfully oriented towards the past, present, or expected future behavior of others. So what he means by social action is action that we engage in which we're thinking about, observing, taking note of how other people are acting, have acted, or we expect will be acting based on our behavior. So we're looking at a relationship between ourselves and others in guiding and conducting our own action. We're orienting ourselves towards how we perceive others to be in relationship to the own courses of action we're considering. Right? So that's what makes action then social action, oriented towards the past, present, or expected future behavior of others. One of the key assumptions then about Verstehen is we are assuming that actors' motives are actually guiding what they're doing and why they're doing it, right? So for Marx, all you need to know is those objective relations. For Weber, you need to understand what motivates people to behave in one way or another. Social action is about individuals attaching subjective meanings to their action and referencing others when they are engaged in those actions, developing particular motives for courses of action, and then engaging in them, right? And this is a point of contention not just between Marx and Weber, but is a point of contention today. Do we actually have motives that are guiding our actions that we understand and that can come to be understood by others? So we've got Verstehen, this interpretive understanding of others. We've got social action, and right. So Verstehen is about interpreting action in this context. But a key part of what Weber is trying to do is to take a look at causality and understand the causal element in which social action is taking place. So he develops two particularly important notions, or distinguishes between two particular ways of thinking about causality. The first he calls causal adequacy. The second he calls subjective adequacy. And this is going to be particularly important as you read through the Protestant Ethic in the Spirit of Capitalism, and it's a key point of distinction between Durkheim and Weber most notably. When Weber talks about causally adequate explanations, this is about explaining in probabilistic terms the relationship between an action and an outcome for some set number of cases. So you have a range of particular cases, right? And you can say that there's a probabilistic relationship between some course of action and some outcome, right? This is the classic X leads to Y that you've gotten in your methods courses. So this is all about a search for empirical regularities. So you'll see when you read the Protestant Ethic in the Spirit of Capitalism, this is how Weber opens up the Protestant ethic. He looks into the empirical regularities between religiosity or religious structures and social stratification, and he develops these particular empirical regularities. But this is not enough for a truly adequate explanation, according to Weber. For us to have a fully adequate explanation, we need subjective adequacy as well. That is, we need to understand the meanings and actions that are derived for a specific case. Right? We have to take those empirical regularities and understand the true meanings behind social actions within them, explaining why an individual did something and what it means to those particular actors. That's adequacy at the level of social meaning. Right? So we need to have both of these things in order to have an adequate causal explanation. So if you imagine for a moment the relationship between gender and the household division of labor. There's this classic pattern in which men who earn less than their wives do less of the housework than do men who earn more than or equal to their wives. Right? So this is a kind of causally adequate explanation, right? That's at the level of causality. We've identified an empirical regularity. In Durkheimian terms, we've identified a social fact, and we've related those social facts to one another. So Durkheim would essentially stop here, right? But Weber says, no, what we have to do is we have to come to understand why this is the case from the vantage point of the actors. Why are men, when they earn less than their wives, why do they pull back and do actually even less housework? And so some plausible explanations are that men find earning less than their wives to be a threat to their masculinity, and so they kind of reassert their gender role in this relationship, or reassert their kind of male gender roles in this relationship, enhance their masculinity by pulling back away from housework, when we might expect in a rational sense for them to do more housework. Right? They transform the meanings of their relationships and social actions within. Right? So this is giving us now subjective adequacy to explain this particular phenomenon. Right? So see this distinction here between Weber and Durkheim. Right? So for Durkheim, causal adequacy is enough. Right? If you remember from the rules of sociological method, Durkheim is all about relating social facts to other social facts. Right? If we have some empirical regularity, in this case, men earning less than their wives, doing less housework than their wives, and we relate that to men's earnings relative to their wives, we related two social facts to one another. Right? And that's all Durkheim asks. But what Weber is pushing for is us to go down and figure out the social meanings that are actually guiding social action in this context to produce those empirical regularities. So this should give you enough to sort of think about in terms of how Weber's going about analyzing the social world. And as you go into, especially as you go into reading The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, you should take these ideas with you, because he does a great job there illustrating Verstehen, social action, and these different levels of causal adequacy. All right, so we will talk later.